So back in the day, there were no child labor laws because if you look at old photos, you look at how young some of the newsboys were that were selling newspapers in the streets of New York. And there was a Facebook page that talks about like the history of New York. And one of the posts that I saw this past weekend or this past week was about how a lot of those newsboys were barely 10 years old and there was a fair percentage that were orphaned, and back then, no social services. So, the Industrial Revolution brought up like a really bad side of humanity where, anything for the profit. Now, there are child labor laws now, and even in terms of kids that want to have a part time job after high school, there's restrictions in California. They need like a permit, and school needs to be involved because they don't want people to be working so much. And, this is not even to begin to talk about all the laws that are in place with child actors, although they can always be improved. But my point is, One Direction, there was only one at the beginning. That was Louis, who was the legal adult, and the rest were 16, 17. So for the first year that One Direction was around, four out of the five, which is like 80% of the band, um, were underage. And what is really quite telling is that once they turn 18, they're legally an adult and all sorts of things apply. But what is legal is not often the same as what is right and ethical. So, how does this apply to Larry? Like many have said, it's a human rights issue. There should never have been, and closeting not just for Larry, but for many other artists, that should never have happened. Now, one one of the reasons why it's a good thing that the Larrys are still around, even if people who are the aunties and the Zarys scream, and even the Zarys, I would say that Larry and Ziam and Neri and Zari and all the combinations need to keep being talked about, but in particular Larry, because with the Ziam thing, I think that there was so much attention on Larry that the Ziam thing was sort of probably not taken as seriously, and they were later to the party. But I would say that another reason why the Ziam thing didn't catch on is that they didn't have the same nuances of expressions and the cute little dalliances. So it didn't pull you in. So, but I think even now more so than ever, I think we should really talk about Ziam because um, yeah, how is Zayn doing? Because poor Zayn, he went through a lot. Now, at least Larry had each other. I think Zayn maybe had Liam, but Zayn was sort of iced out at the end because he left, and him and Louis only seemed to recently reconcile. So I'm kind of glad Louis went to Zayn's concert in LA because I kind of think that Zayn and Louis needed each other, and they did probably do some soul searching after Liam passed, but I feel Zayn lost his husband with Liam, and it's not because of anything Maya Henry said. And in the inability to grieve publicly, which happened to Rock Hudson's last lover. So when Rock Hudson died of AIDS in '85, and everyone was all like, the people who had HIV and AIDS were really treated horribly. And Rock Hudson was the first kind of famous person to be diagnosed with it and to pass away with it. When he died, his partner, who had been with him a long time, couldn't go to the funeral. Like, I'd have to look it up, but when Rock's body was being taken out of his home and to be sent to the funeral parlor, his partner was just standing there watching. And I remember this photo, standing there watching the cars pull out of the driveway. And there was really no place for his partner because their relationship was secret. Now it was still having to be secret long after Rock Hudson really had his heyday was over. He'd kind of semi-retired. So it's sad that there have been So there have been many, many LGBTQ plus couples where they had to hide the relationship, even though they weren't celebrities, from family, from their life. There was a time when your career could be over if it was found out that you were gay. And if you look at the if in the United States, there was a time where they they kind of were looking to fire people by making sure that they weren't gay. There's a whole history of this, and as much as we've progressed in the United States, certain industries, it's almost like the music industry might as well be run in the 1950s by Joseph McCarthy, because he was out for the communists and out for people that were gay. And ironically, one of his lawyers that worked with him was Roy Cohn, who was a self-hating gay man, which is, I don't think he would have been self-hating if he had not been living those times. So, okay, I've been rambling for 6 minutes now. How does this relate to Larry? So, Larry, they're like the poster child of this societal closeting, because the music industry is doing it because it's an established practice, but they're the poster child of all the untold stories of people who had to literally live two lives. But they're also a poster child of a lot of hope. Now, I don't think Larry would be the movement that it is, because it really is a movement. I've said this before. If you didn't have these two personalities who were so out there, so famous, that they could close down a street. And Liam Payne had said, like, he had no idea how huge his band was until after he could, like, after the band ended, and he was looking in retrospect. But you had these two people that, thank kind of God for social media and this legion of these micro expression amateur experts who, I hope you have found a good way to make some money. Maybe some of you have actually become detectives because of this skill set that Larry helped bring out in you. But there, there's this group that they're singing these songs, and they're had been crying in their own performances, and fans paid attention because the amount of photos and footage and whatnot, and the subtleties. So it's kind of like this parasocial relationship that evolved, kind of allowed Larry to kind of tell their story. If what was happening really was happening, because we don't have a confirmation, but we're going to go on the hypothesis that everything that the fans were surmising and believing happened, there's truth to it. They say it's all true. You saw the Larry, then Larry would have created a relationship with the fans, that they would tell their stories. And you go to Larry Stylinson Reddit, and you go to some of the Larry Stylinson groups. They're actually quite fun, but because the fans have said that Louis in particular, like, watches the chatter, and he knew about the rose, because the fans were talking about the rose for months before he got, oh no, the dagger, the dagger tattoo. But because of the rise of social media, there was this sort of like this coding that the fans were all saying, they must be saying this, they must be saying that if they wear this color. And if it's true that Louis was really watching what everyone was saying, then that that was how they were able to kind of communicate what was happening to them without outright saying it. Because the music industry is they're kind of like the mob, and one of Louis' videos kind of suggests that, and I totally don't doubt it. But the the public and the private persona started to fuse, or it's as if the fans could see below the surface if the coding was a two-way communication. Because as much as they were getting oppression from Simon and Company, they had the counteracting force from the fans. And it goes to show that, a lot of celebrities don't realize that they're nothing without their fans. If the Blake Lively situation isn't a really strong example of that, then I don't know what is. But you're made or broken by your fans, and certainly the band understood their fans. I think that past performers don't really. I don't think they really did, or I think they underestimated how fickle the fans could be if you piss them off. Fans have always been the driving force, really. But it's I think because there's such an investment in Larry. Larry is the bridge that kind of could draw open that curtain of the kind of shit that happens in these oppressive, high controlled environments that are supposedly really like liberal and fun. So it's important to keep talking about it, because if they're not together because they were forced apart, or the relationship couldn't survive it, then it really is a violation of nature, really, because relationships should be allowed to run their course, or if they're meant to be, they will sustain. And it's almost like, if you want to do anything in life and do it really well, there's always going to be a cost and benefit analysis. There's always going to be some sacrifices, but some sacrifices should never be required. It's like uh, a person's whole soul should not need to be sold, kind of thing, right? But the way the music industry works, it's almost as if they asked for that. So I think that Larry endures because there are many parts of life where similar things get in the way of just happiness, and there's an opposition to it, not because there's anything wrong, but because other people's agendas violate other people's free wills. And that's why people want to know, and they really hope that they get confirmation or just some certainty that these two made it, because there's not a lot of love in the world sometimes. And people have become jaded with the rise in divorce, with the, like bombardment of messages like ghosting and all sorts of horrible things people do in relationships with other people. And of course, the Tinder swindle. We are constantly inundated with these horrible messages that, God damn it, romance is scary and it's kind of dangerous. As much as the fans have grown up, I think as adults now we still need Larry. We need them to remind us, that love is real. A lot of people wouldn't believe in love if it was not for Larry. And with the human rights aspect, there are people who, and I've said this again before too, that there are people who like never ever thought about the same sex thing, not because they were like, homophobic, but it wasn't anything they were exposed to. And then they learned of Larry, and now they're like huge LGBTQ plus advocates. So that is a transformative effect of culture of Larry. So this is why Larry endures. It's not because people can't move on and people can't let go, and people are like holding on to Polaroids and photos of like when they were young. No, it's not about that. It's about, this was a very sweet love story between two very adorable young people. And for nothing else but an industry that's homophobic, controlling, and kind of criminal, they were put through the ringer and abused, as was the rest of their bandmates, for no fucking reason other than Simon Cowell and his company wanted to make money. Because it is not it's not the 1950s of My Policeman, where you could go to jail for being gay. It's not that anymore. People are much more. I think there's been a lot of like movement in understanding that there's not one standard of how you can be as a human. But ultimately, people don't have to agree with what you're doing. And as long as what they're choosing to do does not hurt you and doesn't really cause any damage anywhere, leave them the fuck alone. And these two should have been allowed to be together, and they should have been allowed to sit together. They should have been allowed to hang out together. They should have been allowed to interact together. They weren't interacting in a way that was like offensive or like too much. No, that was also the beauty of Larry. They weren't in your face about it. They were just I think they reminded a lot of how sweet love. in an age when online dating makes you think that basically it's a war zone out there. So we need Larry. We still need Larry. We really needed Larry when Larry came to be, and we will probably need Larry for a much longer time than Larry thinks we do.